Bass Case 031 sight reading, part 1. How's your sight reading? Can you sight read in treble clef? You better. How's your sight reading with non-bass lines? Meaning, can you sight read horn parts? I'm not even talking about chord chart reading. That's not really sight reading, and I'm going to save that for a later episode because that's a skill set unto its own. But if a band leader or ensemble director or worship leader drops a bass chart on your stand, where do you stand? You walk in for an audition, you're asked to sight read part of a book, right? You want a gig with the community theater who is doing Grease. Can you sight read the book? You want to sub on that gig or sub on any gig. What's your sight reading skills look at? Are you going to be able to sight read something? You want to have more gigs? Learn to sight read. Sight reading is not a dark, deep, mystical situation like some people try to make it out to be. If you don't sight read, you can learn, and you can get on board rather quickly. But it's a process, and it's like exercise. A little bit of practice every day improves it. Doing it every once in a while doesn't help much. I've done quite a bit of sight reading in my life. Bass charts in JE. The occasional bass chart in church. Not many of those, but they turn up from time to time. Musical theater books in the pit. Some real out keys in there, so that keeps you on your toes and practicing sight reading in all keys. When I was in undergrad, I played bass in the guitar ensemble and sight read the guitar 4 parts, all in treble clef. One time the guitarist at the church didn't show up, and I sight read some hymns during communion, right out of the hymnal. That's all treble clef too. They liked it. I had to do it more and more. But if you're new to it and you want to get your sight reading in, practicing the parts at home is good if you can get away with that. Someone has a book and they're saying, hey, this is what we played. But it's going to be different on the gig. And that's where you really learn and really nail down your sight reading. If you, think that you working out some lines on a part in your studio or in your living room, and then you go to the gig or you go to the rehearsal, it's not going to be the same if you're not used to doing a lot of sight reading. It's going to feel different. It's going to be in time, or the time is going to feel funny. But my personal opinion is that sight reading skills develop on gigs where you sight read. It's a baptism by fire, if you will. And by all means, practice parts. That's what you want to do. You have to do that. But really practice them, right? But it's when you get to the gig or the rehearsal is where you're going to see where your sight reading stands. And you're really going to see where it stands if you don't get to practice the parts. You're going to have to sight read them cold like in a reading band. But if you're going to practice and put a metronome on and stick with a section or a page or some clearly defined goal, and like I've talked about on previous podcasts, practice slowly. Put the metronome on 60 and read the bottom line of a Methodist hymnal. That's in bass clef. Reading parts that are set up for your instrument, right? Bass charts is best and most logical. It's the stuff you're going to encounter and be judged on. In my jazz ensemble, the bass book and the alto 1 book are strikingly different looking from each other in comparison to each other. It's different lines. Our lines as bass players vary. Sometimes they're written out. Sometimes you just get chord changes, but usually you get a mixture of them. And sometimes you've got to double the bass trombone part or the bari sax part, or you've got some line with the pianist that they're playing, and you've got to sight read that. You've got to nail that down too. Which which book is best. If you're wanting to get into this, how do I get, I have students coming to me, well, I want on a book to improve my sight reading. What book should I buy? I've got a bookshelf full of them. And they make for those not in the know, there are sight reading books for bass players. The best one is the one you use every day. They all look alike to me. I've got one that's in odd meters. That one's kind of difficult. I've got a couple of them that they start with whole notes. But again, it's a skill you need to process. Like I said, one of those books, it starts with whole notes. Then it progresses up to half notes. Then it goes to quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. Again, put the metronome on and work it out. Something that hit me and something that really elevated my sight reading was when I became an ensemble director. And I was reading scores and listening when I was reading the score and doing score study. And so I had to read trombone lines, not play them on my instrument, but actually read them and sing them and hear them in my head. And I had to read lead trumpet lines. And I had to sing those lines back to horn players in rehearsals to get the rhythms cleared up and the notes too. Speaking of that, rhythms, just reading rhythms, like out of a snare drum book, is highly effective in elevating your sight reading skills. My first teacher had me doing that. I still have that book. It's just a snare book with a bunch of rhythms. I still have that book. It's, it's very old, but it still has my metronome markings penciled in. But if you want to get better at sight reading, or if you like I said, it's a process. But let's say you have some experience at some sight reading, but your sight reading isn't where you want it to be, like most of us, right? You've got to identify your weaknesses. Do you have trouble with eighth notes? Do you have trouble with out keys like D flat? With fast tempos? Maybe it's genre specific. You have trouble reading, things out of the Bossa book, right? The Latin lines, and you're having to read those. Reading really fast tempos throws you. Reading in odd meters like 3, that throws some people. We're so 4, you've heard me mention that in a previous episode, that we're so oriented to reading and playing in 4 that playing in 3 can throw us. Something else too, and I got turned on to this idea relatively quickly, was that to read other parts, like they've made the Charlie Parker Omni book. At one time it was only in concert, I think, or only in E flat. I can't remember what they started with, but it went into bass clef when I was studying, and that was good for me to read alto lines, to learn those alto lines, but also just use it as a sight reading tool. Maybe something else to think about too, when we're thinking about sight reading, something that really throws some reading off is getting lost in the form, which is part of the sight reading challenge. I mean, if you're getting lost in the form, you're not able to per se sight read anything. You're lost, or you're sight reading things that are in the right place. How do we deal with that? In the next episode in which I deal with sight reading, I'm going to go deeper with this. And deeper meaning analyzing the lines you are reading. I was in rehearsal the other day, and there was a line in the horns, which the guitar doubles. And, they were nice pop type lines, rhythmic. And then one of them, right square in the middle, was a C Mixolydian scale ascending. And everybody's dropping this line. And I said, hey, let's look at this. And I said, what is this? And they're like, one of them said, it's a bunch of notes. I said, no, it is a bunch of notes, but it's a scale. And you know this scale. So analyzing what we're reading, which typically is 95% of is either a scale or an arpeggio. But we'll do that part 2 next time.